Dear chess friends, may I have your attention for the following game of Fishy Anand against Magnus Carlsen, played on day 7 of the Global Chess League in Dubai. And I believe it's a serious contender for the game of the year. If not the game of the year, definitely it's the end game of the year, as you're going to see some amazing ideas you may have never seen before. And definitely you're going to learn something. So I hope you will enjoy. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. And then we are ready to kick off with a fantastic battle between the two former world champions. Fishy opens the game with 1e4. And we see the French defense. d4, d5, knight c3, bishop b4, e5, c5. The Wiener variation, all very well-known theory. Bishop takes knight, b takes c3. So black is going to play against these double pawns. It's an interesting battle of white's bishop pair in a close position against a somewhat better pawn structure for black. Black is going to play this move knight c6, which is a very popular modern treatment of the Wiener, has been mainly played by this expert from Hungary, Richard Rapport. And Fishy goes for one of the critical lines. He plays queen g4, attacking the pawn on g7. Black goes g6, taking away that pressure, and now white goes h4. So white is trying to open up the king side as quickly as it can with the move h5, and hopefully at some point both the bishop and the rook and queen are able to impose new threats on that side of the board. Therefore black goes h6, very typical response, so that after h5 black can play the move g5, keeping the file closed. The rook on h1 is not going to join the game yet. White goes f4, very sharp move, trying to deflect, remove the pawn, so that the queen can enter on g7 when the rook will be trapped. But black has a very interesting counter response in mind. Goes for the move queen a5, attacking the pawn on c3, bishop d2. And now, very typical response for these structures is the move f5, attacking the queen with a pawn. And white is for a choice, moving the queen away, which was done in the game, or capture en passant. But probably this pawn capture is not too great. There will follow knight takes f6. The knight comes in to the game with gain of time, hitting the queen, and on the next move the knight will land on the beautiful outpost on e4. So you better don't do that, as white queen g3 was played. So now the pawn on g5 is under threat, and black decides to close the king side. Very good idea. And there are different ways of playing, but now at least the king side is closed, and play will become relatively quiet now, with both sides having time to try to complete their own development. White decided to take on c5, knight g e7. No need to rush, because after bishop d3, the pawn on c5 can be taken anyway. Knight e2, and now interesting idea, knight a5. Knight is doing pretty well in these French structures at the side of the board, gaining control over the c4 square. Queen on g3 is not doing too much, so white offers the exchange of queens, which is accepted. Now you may think this is going to be kind of a boring game. Wait a second, guys, this is just the start of the game. Bishop d7, and now in a lot of French structures the idea is to put a bishop on a4, maybe a rook on c8 with some pressure on the c file. So white goes a4, interesting move, king f7, no need to castle, the king would like to stay close to the center. And now rook h2 b1, white is placing the rooks on the queen side, and black goes b6. So the pawn supports the knight. And the reason why white played this move a4 is that now bishop c1 can be played, with the idea to get the bishop over to a better diagonal. a3, e7, hitting the knight, perhaps ideas to go to d6 or b4. Knight ec6, bishop a3. And now the reason the knight goes to c6 is that it's on its way to d8. Remarkable maneuver, but very typical for the French. Keep this idea in mind. After bishop b4, the knight comes to b7, so that you will not get a double pawn, but you're able to recapture with your other knight. And after knight d4, at some point that knight may come to c5. Not needed yet. You You can play rook hb8 as which was done. Maybe rook h2 c8 also makes sense to retain some pressure along the open, half-open file. But in the game, Magnus played here rook hb8, knight b3, and now the move knight c4 is played. Bishop takes c4, d takes c4, totally different position all of a sudden. The double pawns, they're still there, but black has a pawn on c4. So there's no longer any pressure on this file being exerted by a rook. The knight comes into d4, sort of symmetrical pawn structure with only one open d file. Still, the position is very, very balanced. Rook c8, and white can of course play something like king e3, put a pawn on g3, trying to solidify its position, and it looks still pretty okay for both sides. But white plays here ambitiously with the move a5. That's the reason why the rook from h1 went to b1, and this rook is still there to support the advance of the a pawn. Black plays b5, and now interesting moment. How is white going to proceed? In the game, Fishy played rook d1. Maybe a6 could be considered, but look at these pawns at the side of the board. They are quite far advanced and no longer part of the chain. And in the long run, these pawns, they can become vulnerable. Black will play knight c5 with ideas to attack the pawn very soon as well. At the moment, of course, rook c6 not possible, but it's a potentially a big problem for black. So in the game, there followed rook d1, bishop e8 to avoid any problems with that unprotected bishop on d7, knight e2, so white is conquering the d file, but there are no entry squares. Look at this, all these squares are controlled by black, so white is unable to make use of it at the moment, but black goes a6 to avoid any a6 business by white anytime soon. Rook to d4, rook d8, offering the exchange of one pair of rooks, rook d1, take, take, and of course you can continue here with rook d8, all the rooks will come off the board and looks as if it's heading towards a draw. But Magnus had a different plan. He played here the move bishop c6. Now, the move itself is nothing too special. Rook d8 can still be played anyway. And if I were white, probably I would go for something like g3. This is a safe move, preventing any sort of counterplay. And yeah, not much is happening. But in the game there followed rook d2. And now Magnus senses this is the moment. He goes for the move g3, pawn sacrifice. Incredible idea, so that if you would take with the king, there is rook g8 and you take next on g2 and black is becoming active. You can of course take with the knight as well, but then rook g8 is a possibility with the idea to come into g4, attack the pawn, and it's not so easy to defend the pawn. You may go rook d1, rook g4, rook d4, something like this. And this is a bizarre situation because both sides are not really able to improve their position, and likely something like rook h4, intending to, I don't know what, just make a move. If you go king g1, then you come back with your rook attacking the knight. If the knight goes away, g2 is hanging, and this looks like it's going to be a draw. But now this is what characterizes two really top players. Like black goes for a way to fight for the initiative, and white is doing the same. White is not bailing out here. No, white played here the move king g1, trying to keep the pawn on g2 defended and saying that the pawn on g3 can be taken later, maybe. Rook g8, pawn is protected now by the rook, and the knight comes in to d4, attacking the bishop. But now black changes its mind, goes for the move rook d8 so that knight takes c6, runs into rook takes d2. That's not possible, but white's idea was to go for the move bishop d6, blocking the d file, and now knight takes d6 would be a huge blunder on account of knight takes c6, capturing the bishop, hitting the rook. If the rook goes away, then you take the knight and white is a piece up. Therefore, black got to do something about this bishop, and the bishop comes in to e4. A wonderful post for the bishop. Now it's not longer obstructed by its own pawns. The bishop is nicely placed, keeping an eye on potential weaknesses on c2 and g2. Bishop b4, the bishop goes back so that it protects the pawn. Rook d5, black improves its position. But is there a way to break through? That's the question. King f1, knight d8 with the idea to go knight c6 to intensify the pressure against the knight on d4. King e1, knight c6. Very tricky move. You cannot take on c6. This was the trick Magnus was hoping for, but Fishy didn't fall for it. There's rook takes d2, king takes d2, bishop takes c6. Opposite colored bishop endgame. Very often these endgames are very drawish, but now the pawn on g2 will be taken next. You get a passed pawn yourself. Also the pawn on h5 as a target can be attacked by the bishop. So probably this is just winning for black. But in the game, knight e2 was played, offering the exchange of rooks on the d-file, and after rook takes d2, king takes d2, bishop takes g2, there is knight takes g3. So the pawns are gone. And what to think of this endgame? Well, definitely this bishop is not looking great on b4. It cannot go away, because in that case the pawn on a5 can be taken. So white is kind of stuck, but how is black able to break through? The king, that is the main problem. The king would really love to participate, but doesn't seem to be easy to get the king activated. So bishop f3, keeping an eye on this pawn on h5, so the knight cannot go away. King e3, attacking the bishop. Bishop d1, king d2, attacking the bishop again. Bishop g4, king e3, and Magnus is going for repetition? No way. He goes for the move king e8, king d2, and now his idea was to go knight e7. So the knight is on its way to d5 to attack the pawn on f4, and that would be a very big achievement. So bishop takes e7 is played, king takes e7, and now we have an endgame of knight versus bishop. This is going to be tremendously exciting. Just give yourself a few more minutes to watch the entire video and you will learn a lot about these endgames. Because what should white try to do here? Well, he definitely needs to avoid the king to infiltrate. But you see that these squares are still covered by the pawn on d4 and the knight on e4. So the king cannot be activated. But with the help of the b pawn, you can try to remove the pawn from c3 and try to create a breakthrough either in the center or on the queen side. Now in the game, king c1 was played. Very logical move, as white is about to move its king over, but it's probably not the best move. What is a better idea is to stay in the center with the king. Now after king d7, you go knight e2. If you take on h5, I'm going to play knight d4 and show you that this king is unable to enter via the center, and this king is just going over to the h-file, and there's absolutely no chance of breaking through as black. So that would be a draw. If instead of capturing the pawn on h5, black will go for king to c6, there is knight c1. Brilliant idea. After bishop takes h5, you go for the move knight a2, bishop goes away, you put your knight on b4, you're closing the queen side again. There's no way the king is able to infiltrate, and after something like king b7, king f2, the game is dead draw despite the extra pawn. Interesting plan. To place the knight on b4 would have enabled white to save the game. There followed king to c1, and still things are heating up. King d7, king b2, king c6, king a2, king d5, king a3, king c5. So now the idea is that after king b2, you have possibilities of breaking through with your b pawn. But if you do that immediately, let's not focus on that. Black played in the game bishop d1 first, king c1, bishop f3, king b2. Very similar. This idea of activating the bishop is actually very important. Now, the big question is, when is black going to play this move b5, b4? In the game, Magnus played it immediately. Very understandable. But it would have been much better to prepare the bishop to come over to e8 so that it keeps an eye on this pawn. After king a3, bishop e8, the knight still cannot go away. It needs to keep the pawn defended. If white plays this move king b2, now we go b4. Excellent way of opening up the position. After c takes b4, now you're not going to capture the pawn on b4, but you're going to play king d4. Look at this bishop. Keeps an eye on this pawn on h5, but more importantly, it retains control over the b5 square. So white is unable to carry out the breakthrough, and the king is going to wrap up these two pawns in the center, creating connected passed pawns for black, and black is totally winning. Understandably, being low on time, all these finesses were overlooked by both players. In the game, Magnus played the move b4 right away. After c takes b4, he played now the move king d4 and things are heating up. I should point out also that taking the pawn on b4 leads to a drawish endgame. You win the pawn, but once again, the squares d4 and e4 are covered by white. The king will stay on a2 and b2. And there's absolutely no chance the a-pawn, the extra a-pawn for black will decide the game. So instead, Magnus goes for king d4. Very critical idea with the plan of going after the pawns on f4 and e5. But now white goes c3 and you may consider the move king e3, very interesting move, but instead king d3 was played with very similar intentions. As if the king goes away, you take the pawn on c3. If the knight moves, the pawn on h5 will be taken and the h-pawn will be really strong. The bishop can always come back, support the pawn and keep control over the long diagonal. So white is in sort of zugzwang, has to play here the move b5, but it's a good move. A takes b5, a6. The pawn is really fast, but it's still controlled by the bishop. King d2, a7, bishop to d5. Very important moment. What is white gonna do? Fishy thought, let's try to create a pawn to deflect this bishop by taking on f5. Amazing sacrifice. But in hindsight, maybe knight f1 would have been a much simpler move. Check. If the king goes away, you go knight g3, and that could lead to a repetition of moves. Now, after instead what happened in the game, after knight takes f5, now you're going to really enjoy yourself. E takes f5, e6. You understand that the bishop cannot take the pawn because of a8 queen. And this pawn is really trying to deflect the bishop, but now we understand Magnus' idea, why he decided to go with its king to the queen side, to the center, rather than capturing the pawn. He is trying to create a passed pawn himself as well. If you do take the pawn, then c3, c2, c1, game over. Therefore, e7 is the big move. B takes c3 with check. King a2. Now two pawns are about to queen, but black is also there. He goes for the move c2, and now white has to choose which pawn to promote. If you play e8 queen, rather than promoting yourself immediately, you play the move c3 with check first. The king got a move. Wherever it goes, if it goes to a3, you go c1 queen with check, and it's game over. Black is a bishop up, still has a passed pawn, should technically be winning. So therefore, white played instead the move a8 queen, so that you're keeping an eye on this bishop. The bishop got a take, and only now you play e8 queen. And now, very interesting moment, because what is black going to do? Black, of course, can promote his own pawn now, but Magnus didn't play it. Can you see why? Why did black not play this? 3, 2, 1. There is this beautiful move, queen e3 check, with the point that if you take the queen, it's stalemate. Look at this amazing idea. What an escape for white. And therefore, you can just sacrifice the queen and that will just be a draw. Magnus had seen it and thought, let's start here with the move bishop e4. Your queen down, but the pawn is about to promote. But still, bishop e4 is a mistake. Instead, there is a brilliant winning idea. It's the move c3. So with this move, you are resolving that stalemate problem. The king is always able to move. On the next move, you're planning to get a new queen. If white is going to give a check, you move the king away. And look at this king. It's not able to approach the promotion square. And black, of course, can give a check. And only now you can block with the bishop. If you go queen a3, then the king comes back to d2 to prepare. c1 queen, queen d6, bishop d3. The checks are over. Black is a queen down, but on the next move it will be a full piece up. Absolutely insane lines. But Magnus didn't play it. He went for the move bishop e4. Queen d8 check, bishop d3. That was his idea. But now, had Fishy been more careful, he could have spotted this move, queen b6, with the idea that if black creates a new queen, it's queen e3 check once again. Queen takes e3, stalemate one more time. The king cannot go where, but it's not a check. Instead, if the king goes away to d1, hoping that queens are going to be exchanged, then black is, of course, winning. But you can go queen f3, whatever you do. Let's say you go king c2. Now even queen takes d3. Boom. That is going to be stalemate one more time. Fantastic stuff. But Fishy instead played here the move queen to d4 with very similar ideas. What is he doing? He probably was thinking that after c1 queen, there's the same idea of queen e3 with stalemate one more time. But look at this. This is absolutely insane. Something you almost never see in a real game, and especially not at the highest level. Now Magnus was thinking and spotted a brilliant move. Instead of getting a queen, he promoted to a knight with check. How is this possible? Is this a winning attempt? Is it an attempt to make a draw? Well, if you go with the king to a1, it's knight b3 with check, forking the queen, and king, black is winning. If the king goes to b2, then the idea is to go knight e2, attacking the queen. If the queen goes away, look at the configuration of black's pieces. Now the move c3 can be played, and the c-pawn is going faster. If the king goes to b3, you play c2, bishop protects the pawn, knight controls the promotion square, so it's game over. Absolutely insane. Queen a5 check, king d1, that's it. Didn't happen in the game. The critical move is king to a3. And now you got to be precise. If knight e2, there is queen b2 and white is still able to give a number of checks. But Magnus played very precisely here. The move c3. And look at this. This is something I cannot recall ever having seen something like this before. The king is unable to come in front or to challenge the pawn. And whatever you do on the next move, I'm going to play knight e2, attack the queen, and the c-pawn is coming forward. Queen b6 was played, knight e2, there are no checks. That's the strength of black's setup. The king is absolutely safe. And now queen takes h6. If these pawns wouldn't been there, this move would just be a check and white would be still okay. But now the pawn on f4 is just hindering white. c2, and basically here things went completely wrong for white. There, according to the notation, the move queen b6 was played, and now I don't understand. c1 queen looks as if it's just game over. You're two pieces up. It's going to be checkmate in the few, but I think something went wrong with the live board, and knight c1 was played, and here after queen c6, knight e2, the game is still winning. But I assume that something happened with players moving the pieces over the board. Maybe pieces were dropping, and instead of the move queen b6, maybe queen c6 was actually still a practical attempt. But then you can get a new queen, queen takes, king takes, very important, because have you seen how to stop this h-pawn? It's about to be promoted. You can go knight takes f4, h7, knight g6, covering the promotion square, and the f-pawn decides. So how the game exactly finished, I'm not sure about. Other sources will have to inform us, or maybe you have seen the game live. Then feel free to leave some comments in the chat below. I would welcome any feedback on this particular endgame or on my videos in general. And I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and then I wish every video I could record was an endgame like this one. This is something truly unique, so we should definitely cherish the fact that these two top players are still battling and creating masterpieces for us, the audience. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye bye.